Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Moreus and I make art tutorials that are fun, easy, and accessible for everyone. Hi everybody, today we're going to be talking about success with pastels, and while we're doing that I'm going to give you a time lapse of this cute white dog. Before we get into the video, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. I subscribed and I'll try to personally reply to your comments. The first thing I want to talk about is the surface color of the paper. I like to work on a colored paper. This is Clairefontaine pastel mat, which has like a sanded finish to it. I like to have a different color background so that I can see how much pastel I'm putting on, where I need to add pastel, because pastel works best in layers, and I'm trying to do an underpainting. So I'm trying to add some rich tones, some dark browns where my shadows are, and this way your details on top, you have that base color that can show through. Especially with fur and on a white dog, you want some of that rich underpainting to show through, to give it some depth and to give it the details of all the fur and hairs on the dog. Very soft pastel can fill up the tooth of the paper quickly, so be sure to blend in between each layer, especially working on a sanded paper. You want to push the pastel into the valleys of the paper. Think of the texture as hills and valleys, and leave the hills exposed to accept more layers of pastel. The key to realistic pastels is to layer, and this way your detail on top will show that underpainting through there and give it a more realistic effect. You want to make sure you have a decent plan for your piece of art. So I like to sketch my outline of my subject onto a piece of tracing paper. Then I cover the back of the tracing paper with some soft white pastel chalk. I flip it over and I go over it with a pencil, and that leaves this white outline on my pastel mat board. So it's a good map of where I have like the fur changing directions, or the eyes, the nose, the mouth, all your details. So success will be having a decent plan in the beginning. You don't necessarily need to put in all the details. I prefer not to, but the few directional lines of fur or feathers, if you're doing a bird, animals, this is very helpful. I also like to figure out my highlights before starting to keep those areas pure and not to muddy up those areas. So the bright highlight in the eyeball, I like to keep that white and not go over it with any darker colors to muddy that up. With pastels, you can put lighter pastels over dark. That's the beauty of it. But in an area that is going to be a real pure white, I like to keep that pretty pure and not do any underpainting in those areas. Try not to overwork your painting. There's going to be a point in time where the tooth of the paper starts to fill up, and then you won't be able to put any more colors on top of that. You can temporarily fix this by spraying a workable fixative on it, letting it dry, and then going back in with your details. But I prefer to have a really solid underpainting that's completely blended in and will allow for more details on top. If you're stuck with an area, I like to have my image on an iPad in front of me so that I can blow up certain areas and go in and really get that detail out of there. Like if you're working on the ear, you can blow up just the ear and just work on that little section. Just keep referring back to your reference photo and pay attention to where your light source is throughout the piece. You want to keep that consistent. In this painting, I'm using hard pastel, soft pastel, and Carbothello pastel pencils. I like to have that range of the three items to use in my drawing, not only because you can get different colors from the three different things, but you have the soft pastel, which gives you a really easy way to do backgrounds and put down a lot of color really quickly. Your harder pastels can go in with detail, as well as your pastel pencils are great for detail. And just make sure you blend in between each layer, and you'll have a more successful painting. It's very important that you choose the right type of paper for pastels. I prefer the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. It's got a heavy tooth. There are many other papers. Some are not as heavily textured, but make sure you're using a pastel paper. It will directly affect your results in the end. Work lightly so you can add many layers to create depth. You want to keep your pastels stored in a dry place. They break easily and most times are safest in the box that they come in. Usually there's like a foam piece of material that goes over top of them, which will keep them from breaking and keep them in their container. You don't need to have a million colors of pastels. You can mix colors to create new colors. On a scrap of paper, you can mix them together and then add them on with a soft tool. But you don't need a full 120 set of pastels. You can use just a few colors, mix them together, blend them together so you can layer them and blend them right on the paper, and you'll get a good success. And really, it's all about value. So your colors could be totally wrong. As long as your values are correct, you'll still have a realistic finished product. You want to be careful when using the pastels. They can be quite dusty. It's probably best to work on an easel so the loose pastel dust can just kind of fall off the paper. I'm working in a flat surface here just for filming reasons, but normally I would work on an easel and that pastel dust would just kind of fall off of the paper. You don't want to be breathing in that pastel dust. The particles are very small and you want that dust to not just blow all over the paper. You want to always frame your pastels behind glass with a space between the glass and the work. A lot of people like to use fixatives. I do use a fixative, but you don't have to as long as you're not putting your hands on it, dust isn't getting on it while it's not framed. You keep a glassine sheet or a piece of tracing paper or something on top of it. Dust will settle on there, especially since the paper is heavily toothed. But you don't need to use a fixative. It is preferred if you take it to a framer. They do prefer that you use a fixative. It can change the color of your piece depending on what brand of fixative you're using. You want to use something that's a clear fixative made for pastels. I had a fixative that was for graphite, and it says right on the product, do not use on pastels because of the polymers or whatever is in that spray. It can react with the pastels and change your whole look of your piece. So just be careful with that. If you found this tutorial helpful today, please leave me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.